5 confirmed murders, 13 attempted, 4 coded ciphers, 2 of which remain unsolved to this day, and 1 killer who was never caught. This is not a story about a monster. Monsters are fiction. They live under beds, in dark waters, in places we can choose not to go. This is a story about something far more disturbing. A man, an ordinary, deeply troubled man, who decided the world owed him an audience. And for reasons that still keep investigators awake at night, he got one. To understand the Zodiac, you have to understand the world he stepped into. "1968 was the year America lost its nerve. Martin Luther King, assassinated in April. Bobby Kennedy, assassinated in June. The Democratic National Convention, a riot on live television. The country was cracking along every fault line it had spent decades ignoring. Trust in institutions, in police, in government was eroding fast. And it was precisely into that erosion that the Zodiac stepped. Northern California felt like it existed at a remove from all of that turbulence. Small towns, quiet roads, neighbors who knew each other's names. These were the people the Zodiac chose. Not because they represented anything, not because they had done anything, but because they were there, because they were vulnerable, because he could. December the 20th, 1968. Benicia, California. 17-year-old David Faraday is getting ready for his first real date with a girl named Betty Lou Jensen. He had butterflies. He wanted everything to be perfect. He was on the edge of something, a night, a relationship, a future that felt like it could be the beginning of everything. He had no idea it would be the end. Lake Herman Road was a rite of passage for young people in Solano County, a gravel turnout away from porch lights and parents, a place where teenagers could just be. It felt safe because nothing bad had ever happened there. They'd been parked perhaps an hour when a second car appeared. No rush, no hurry, just headlights drifting slowly toward them along the gravel. A figure approached the driver's side, and then David Faraday was shot at close range behind his left ear. He never moved from the driver's seat. Betty Lou ran. She made it 28 feet from the car. 28 feet. 5 shots, fired from behind. All 5 struck her in the back. At 11:14 p.m. on December the 20th, 1968, the last Friday before Christmas, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were gone. The shooter had not panicked, had not rushed, had walked back to his car and driven away without incident. No witnesses, no motive, no leads. The investigation began that night. It has never closed. 6 months pass. The investigation stalls. The families grieve. The town tries to move on. But the man who killed David and Betty Lou hasn't moved on at all. He's been waiting, planning, watching. Darlene Ferrin was 22 years old and the kind of person who lit up a room. A waitress at Terry's restaurant in Vallejo, she had the gift of making everyone feel like a regular. She was also a mother, and recently she'd started to feel afraid. She'd noticed a man, stocky, well-dressed, horn-rimmed glasses. He smelled of leather, she told friends. He kept showing up near her home, outside the diner, just watching. She didn't know his name. She only knew the feeling of being prey. July 4th, 1969. Darlene was out with her friend Mike Majot at Blue Rock Springs Park. Another car pulled in, left, came back. A man got out carrying a large flashlight. Mike thought it might be a police officer and started reaching for his ID. The man shot them both without a word. No demand, no warning, no hesitation. Then he walked back toward his car and came back and shot them again. Darlene Ferrin died before help arrived. Mike Majot, shot through the neck and cheek, somehow survived. 40 minutes later, a call came into Vallejo Police Dispatch. A man's voice, even, rehearsed, almost conversational. He claimed responsibility for both attacks and gave details only the killer could know. He was calling from a payphone directly across the street from the Vallejo Sheriff's Office. Not hiding, not running, performing. Every serial killer has a signature. For the Zodiac, It was language. He needed people to know it was him. He needed credit. He needed an audience larger than any crime scene could provide. In late July 1969, he wrote letters to 3 San Francisco Bay Area newspapers simultaneously, each containing a cipher and a demand. Print this on your front page, or I will go on a kill rampage. The cipher was 408 characters, a sophisticated homophonic substitution method using Greek letters, Morse code, astrological signs, and semaphore elements. The FBI couldn't crack it. SFPD cryptographers couldn't crack it. It took a school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty 10 days. Working from the hypothesis that the killer's ego was so large he would open with the word I, they reverse-engineered the key. The decoded message read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise and all the people I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." In a postscript, he signed with a symbol, a circle bisected by a cross like a rifle scope. He called himself the Zodiac. More letters followed. Always the crosshair. Always that tone. Superior, taunting, pleased with himself. He threatened to blow up a school bus and sent diagrams. He claimed a body count climbing as high as 37. Police began to understand something beyond the obvious threats. The Zodiac didn't just want to kill. He wanted to narrate his killing. He wanted authorship, control of the story. He was a man who felt invisible in ordinary life, and had found, in murder and correspondence, the only audience he could command. His second major cipher, the Z340, sent in November 1969, defeated everyone for 51 years. The NSA looked at it. Amateur cryptographers spent decades on it. Nothing. Until December 2020, when a trio of codebreakers working across 3 continents finally cracked it using a diagonal reading pattern no one had tried. The decoded message repeated his obsession with paradise and slaves. 51 years of waiting, and the great secret was this: a lonely man telling himself the story of his own importance. September 27, 1969, Lake Berryessa, Napa County. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, students at Pacific Union College, were picnicking by the water when a man stepped out of the trees. He was wearing a black hood, square cut, falling to his shoulders. On the chest, in white, the crosshair symbol. He had dressed for the occasion. He told them he was an escaped convict who needed their car to get to Mexico. He produced a gun and told them to lie face down. He had rope, pre-cut, in measured lengths. He had brought it from home. He knew exactly what he was going to do before he left the house. And then, without further words, he drew a long knife. Brian was stabbed 6 times. Cecilia was stabbed 10. Before leaving, he walked to Brian's car and wrote on the door with a marker the dates of his attacks, the weapons used, signed with the crosshair. A trophy. Brian survived. Cecilia died 2 days later, never having regained consciousness. Investigators found footprints, size 10½, traced to Wing Walker boots, a military-issue model sold primarily to veterans and government workers. A clue, one of many, none of which led anywhere. October 11th, 1969, San Francisco. Paul Stein was 29 years old, a PhD student driving a cab at night to pay his way through school. He picked up a passenger at the corner of Mason and Geary and drove to Presidio Heights. The cab stopped at Washington and Cherry. One shot to the right temple. Paul Stein was killed instantly. 3 teenagers in a nearby house had watched from their window and called police immediately, giving a clear description. White male, heavy-set, around 40, wearing glasses. Here is where the case takes its most agonizing turn. The dispatcher broadcast the suspect as a black male. Officers Don Fook and Eric Zelms were 2 blocks from the scene. They saw a man matching the actual description, white, heavy-set, glasses, walking calmly through the fog. They slowed, they looked. The APB said black male. They drove on. Officer Fook would later say he had spoken briefly to the man, who pointed him in the wrong direction. Then he drove away. In his next letter, the Zodiac gloated. He knew the officers had passed him, had spoken to him. He was delighted. To prove it, he enclosed a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, cut from the body. His message, translated from taunting into plain English: "I was right there. You looked at me, and I walked away." After the Stein murder, something shifted in San Francisco. The Zodiac was no longer a rural story. He was here, in the city, on a street corner. Letters kept arriving at the Chronicle. The city reorganized its daily rhythms around his threats. Extra patrols on school routes, parents driving children who used to walk. By 1974, the last confirmed Zodiac letter arrived. And then, nothing. No arrest, no death, no explanation. The investigation became its own kind of tragedy. At a time with no national criminal database, no DNA analysis, no CCTV, no cell phone records, when a detective in Vallejo had no automatic way of knowing what a detective in San Francisco had found, the Zodiac exploited every gap. The attacks spanned multiple jurisdictions, different cities, different counties, different departments, no single investigator with all the pieces. In 2002, a partial DNA profile was extracted from the envelope flaps. The killer had licked the stamps himself. That profile has been compared to hundreds of suspects over the decades. Not one has matched. Every unsolved case produces a prime suspect. For the Zodiac, that man was Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher and Navy veteran living in Vallejo. He owned a Zodiac brand watch. The crosshair symbol was on its face. Friends told investigators that before the murders began, Allen had talked about hunting humans, about calling himself the Zodiac, about a short story in which a man hunts other men as the most thrilling sport. In 1991, Mike Mageau, the survivor who had been shot through the face at Blue Rock Springs, looked at a photo lineup. He pointed to Allen's photograph. "That's him. That's the man who shot me." 22 years after the night he nearly died, he still knew the face. But the physical evidence told a different story. Allen's fingerprints did not match the prints from the Stein crime scene. His DNA did not match the profile from the envelope flaps. He died of a heart attack in August 1992, the most compelling suspect the investigation ever produced. And yet, officially, not the answer. A search of his home afterward turned up bomb materials and a typewriter consistent with the Zodiac letters. But no confession, no match, no closure. Investigators remain divided. Some say the DNA rules him out entirely. Others argue the Zodiac may have had someone else mail his letters deliberately. The case stays open. The truth stays just out of reach. The Zodiac case didn't just haunt investigators, it haunted culture. Robert Graysmith, a Chronicle cartoonist who became obsessed with the case, published a definitive account in 1986 that remains a reference for investigators today. David Fincher adapted it into a film in 2007 that many consider his masterpiece, not because it solves anything, but because it captures the maddening, life-consuming nature of almost knowing. The case has its own subculture now: amateur code breakers, genealogists running DNA through public databases, forum threads with tens of thousands of posts. 2 ciphers remain unsolved. The Z13, 13 characters, believed by many to contain the killer's real name. The Z32, 32 characters sent with a map, claim to mark where he buried a bomb. Both remain uncracked. Somewhere in those symbols is either the answer or the final joke of a man who was making it all up just to watch people chase him. Here is what I want to be careful about at the end of this story. There's a version, the version the Zodiac wanted told, in which he is a dark genius, a superior mind who outplayed an entire law enforcement apparatus. I don't want to tell that story, because it isn't true. His ciphers were cracked by a schoolteacher and his wife, and by 3 amateur code breakers working over the internet. His crimes were not clean. He left footprints, witnesses, shell casings, handwriting, DNA on envelope flaps. He evaded capture, not because he was brilliant, but because the systems designed to catch him didn't exist yet. If the Zodiac attacked today, he would almost certainly be caught within days. The DNA from those envelopes compared against modern genetic databases would return a match. His phone would place him at every scene. His face would be on cameras before he got home. He did not beat the system. He existed before it. The investigators who spent their careers on this case described him the same way, not as a monster, not as a genius, but as a pathetic, deeply lonely man. A man who felt powerless in his ordinary life and found in murder and in letters to newspapers a way to feel significant. A man who needed an audience more than anything else. A man who built a mythology around himself because the reality of who he was felt too small to bear. He wanted to be a legend, and in a grim, limited sense, he got it. His symbol is recognized. His name is remembered. But here is what he did not count on. He did not count on us choosing what to remember. David Faraday, 17 years old, nervous, dressed in his best for a first date, chose to make that night perfect for someone he cared about. Remember that. Betty Lou Jensen, 16 years old, running in the dark, ran because she wanted to live. Remember that. Darlene Ferrin, 22, a mother, a woman who lit up every room she walked into, was loved by everyone who knew her. Remember that. Cecilia Shepherd, 22, a student with decades ahead of her, spent her last afternoon by the water with someone she cared about. Remember that. Paul Stein, 29, working his way through a PhD, driving a cab at night to pay for it, was going somewhere. Remember that. The Zodiac wanted us to remember his crosshair, his ciphers, his taunts. Instead, remember them.